Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This is going to be my review for Star Wars The High Republic Light of the Jedi. So this is the first full-on adult novel for The High Republic. It's meant to, I suppose, pretty much be the launch point of The High Republic, in that this definitely feels like the thing you need to read out of like all of the stuff that's actually being released at the moment. That without this, you are lacking, I think, a lot of the context for, you know, what the High Republic actually is. So I'm going to focus most of this review on the spoiler section of the video, just because I don't really feel I have a ton to say about this book that's not getting into the details. So in terms of a quick non-spoiler review, all I'll say is that I really enjoyed this book and would recommend it. I don't want to go as far as to be like this is like the best Star Wars book ever or the best Star Wars book we've had in years, but it feels like it pretty much is that. I think, you know, this book isn't a 10 out of 10. I'm not quite sure it's a 9 out of 10, but I think it's like an 8, maybe 8.5 out of 10, and a lot then will depend on where they go with this stuff. How the second novel follows this up, and how in reflection this first novel will look, you know, once we have a better sense for how they're going overall with the story. But as an introduction to this era, it lays all of the groundwork that you need to get the idea of the Republic, the Jedi of this era, how it is different than the prequel era Jedi. And I think it does distinguish itself as being its own era, while also not being like so different. It's sort of familiar, but just slightly different, and I actually really like that. I was a bit worried that it might have been like too out there with the way that they were going with things, in terms of like they were talking about how it was like, you know, Jedi, Knights of the Round Table, and I didn't really get that much of a sense that like the core like beliefs of the Jedi, or how they go about doing things, are that different than the Jedi we see in the prequel era. So that was really interesting to see. The villains get, I suppose, properly introduced here. The Nihil, and they're like this, you know, obviously space pirates, bandits, whatever way you want to call them, and they seem fairly simplistic initially. They're just this kind of group of raiders, basically, that take what they want, and they're exactly like a pirate crew. But then the main villain, Marchion Ro, really begins to stand out as the book gets into its second half. And he is a fascinating character by the end of this, and I'm so excited to see where they go with this, because he adds so many extra layers to the Nihil, that the Nihil are almost like their own thing. And this is Marchion Ro, who just sort of like is the current leader of the Nihil, taking them in this different direction according to his own master plan and his own you know, beliefs and ideals that we don't fully know about just yet. But again, I'll talk more about Marchion Ro in the spoiler section of the video, but just know that the villains here I actually think are pretty good. I was worried that like, how are they going to make just a group of bandits a good villain for like the Jedi at their peak, basically. But they managed to do it more through sort of technology than with, you know, force powers or anything like that. So they actually executed that very well in my mind. And final thing for the sort of non-spoiler section, because I think everyone pretty much knows that the Great Disaster is the big sort of kickoff point here that gets this era properly going in terms of something the Jedi have to deal with. Without going into too many details, what the Great Disaster is basically a ship blows up in hyperspace, and the pieces of this wreckage begin to fall out of hyperspace. They're traveling at basically the speed of light as they come out of hyperspace, and that means it's basically like a kind of meteor shower thing when it happens. It was a pretty big ship, so these happen sort of randomly, multiple happen at once pretty much every time they hit a system, and it's all affecting the outer rim. So it's this real test of the Republic as to how do they respond to a major threat to a lot of the new planets in the Outer Rim that have just joined the Republic. And that's the reason the Jedi are sent out to deal with this initially. It's a test of the Supreme Chancellor of this era, Lina So, and so on. And I think it just works really, really well in that the core of this book is sort of disaster response. It's not necessarily battles. There is some action as the Jedi encounter the Nihil, and you get some space battles. But the first half of the book especially is more of the Jedi as like the disaster response crew, and how they do the sort of, air crash investigation style thing of like figuring out what the great disaster was, how they predict future emergences, as they call them, as the pieces come out of hyperspace, and what they do to prove themselves as the Jedi at their peak in terms of, what is effectively a plane crash, I suppose, a ship crash turned into a natural disaster just with how it happens. How can the Jedi necessarily do all that much, but they are capable of responding to this, and that's what's so interesting. So, just overall, a pretty large group of characters in the sense that, yes, I suppose you can pick out some of these characters as being like, oh yeah, this is the main character. But even the character who you feel like, oh yeah, they're the main character, they're probably only in about like a third of the book. So Avar Kriss and Elzar Mann are probably the two like main Jedi in the book, given that like Avar is the character who's put in charge of the Jedi dealing with the Great Disaster. But she's not in every chapter, in that there are chapters from the villain's perspective. So in a way, Marchion Ro is like one of the main characters of the book, but as is one of the other, leaders of part of the crew of the Nihil. Avar Kriss, Elzar Mann, some of the other Jedi like Loden Greatstorm and his Padawan Bel Zettifar. They're the other kind of plot of the book as well. Plus, there's other Jedi like Skier. You have some chapters from more the political perspective with the Supreme Chancellor. And so it's kind of an ensemble cast that introduces you to a lot of the main players who I suppose are going to get potentially more focused books as things go on. Because this book name drops a bunch of other characters as well, who we see in like the other book, A Test of Courage. It name drops some of the characters and includes some of the characters from the comic series. And now that the sort of second wave of books has sort of been announced, it touches on like, Stellan Gios is going to be, I think, the main character in the second main novel. They touch on him a little bit in this. So there's some cool stuff going on there. So if there's any maybe weakness to this book, it probably is just that even the likes of an Avar Kriss, who probably is the main Jedi you come out of this remembering, you probably maybe don't feel like you get to maybe know her as much as you probably should by the end of this. But they give you enough of an intro to her where you're more like, I'd be perfectly fine with them having a book where she is the focus, because her sections of the story were very interesting. The same goes for Elzar Mann. Loden Greatstorm seems very important to the plot, depending on where they go with things. Same with Bel Zettifar. And then a bunch of the other, like, random Jedi they just talk about for, like, a chapter or two. You also want to know about them. And that's just cool. Just getting to know, like, as they tease and name drop, like, here is the Jedi Council of this era. Here are the Grand Masters of the Council in this era, and just like hearing a few names you've heard about before. So overall, non-spoilers, absolutely recommend the book. I think, it's one of those ones where, like, ignore a lot of the hyperbolic reaction to the High Republic, that it's bad, and like the writers behind it are this and that. Read the books yourself and judge it from there. That's what I did, and I came out of this actually quite liking it and being like, this is a breath of fresh air that I think the books needed, in that I think I've gotten a little tired of a lot of the other books that they've tended to do in the Disney era, just sort of being a kind of relatively light, like, prequel into like the new movie or the new thing, or they're like the Timothy Zahn books being all about Thrawn, and he's on his like second trilogy of books now. Like just stuff that they know is going to work because of the author character dynamic. This actually feels like they're going to tell a large sort of epic story with a big ensemble cast, and that's sort of what I've been waiting for out of the books for a while now, given that they've avoided like really setting a lot in the prequel era where you can do more of that. Because for me, probably the main takeaway is just that I really like eras in Star Wars where there is a lot of Jedi, and the Disney books have tended to stay away from that stuff. This is exactly what I want. So that's that. So yeah, pretty positive for me. So let's move into spoilers. So this is going to be full spoilers from the book. I'll be talking about pretty much all of the core details from this. So only stick on board with this if you want to be spoiled or if you've already read the book. I'll have the chapter things on YouTube to know which is the spoiler and which is the non-spoiler section. But yeah, moving into the spoilers, let's start off with, I suppose, something not particularly like crazy big on the spoiler section, but just some sort of notable characters. So the thing with the High Republic was that they got across, you're not going to know basically most of the characters because it's like 200 years before the prequels. So it's right in this time period where pretty much Yoda is the only character you're going to know. But as you read this book, you find out that actually there's a few other names you might know. So 3 members of the council during this era are Yoda, Oppo Rancisis, and Yariel Poof. Oppo Rancisis and Yariel Poof you obviously see on the council in episode 1. Oppo Rancisis I think you see in the Clone Wars also on the council in at least an episode or 2. So they're these characters who aren't really covered all that much in I think most of the media. I think the old EU features some stuff with these characters, but not all that much. So they fit as like, it makes sense. They're some of the kind of weirder species that we've seen, so it makes sense that they would also be very long-lived. Probably not as long-lived as Yoda, because he's a Grand Master, and the other 2 are just on the council, but very interesting stuff with them. And what I find so cool about this is that even though Yoda is technically like in this book, he's only on screen basically in the scene himself. In like the very last scene of the book where they open the Starlight Beacon. Other than that, yes, a lot of the Jedi still, when comparing their skill, still reference themselves with regards to like Yoda. Like, I'm not as good as Yoda at this. That he's still seen as basically one of, if not the best Jedi in the Order. He is a Grand Master in this era. So that's kind of cool. But the interesting dynamic with Yoda is that they also mention that he's not regularly like on the council. He's a part of it, but he spends most of his time off adventuring on planets with groups of younglings and Padawans, which fits his character that like while there are other Jedi that I suppose are kind of on the same level as him, he's not required to be that like rock at the center of the Jedi. So he can be more of that, I suppose, fun side of Yoda. He doesn't have to be as serious as we've seen him at times in the prequels. So seeing him just like, yeah, he gets on very well with the younglings, and he's a great teacher to the kids, as we've seen in like the Clone Wars arc, The Gathering, and like episode 2, that scene with the kids and Obi-Wan was really good. So it fits that, oh yeah, like, of course he would have a whole group teaching them on the go, having these adventures, which I believe is what the IDW High Republic comic is actually about. It's basically the adventures of Yoda's squad of Jedi younglings and Padawans, so that's kind of cool. As for Operancisis and Yariel Poof, they only really speak in a specific council scene, but it's a very interesting scene in the book because both of them sort of reference the past, and we get a few references to like the Sith Wars in the past, and that the Jedi at some point used to be very small in number, I guess, in the aftermath of the Sith Wars. And this era, the High Republic era, is the Jedi after they've grown back from that. They've bounced back from the Sith Wars and are now at their prime, basically. So that's kind of interesting to see that. None of these characters are focused on particularly in the books, but It's nice that there is more than just Yoda, but they're not jumping ahead and being like, here's like 10 of these characters you already know about. Instead, it's like, no, here's Yoda plus two council masters who you don't really know that much about, even if you have, taken in everything Star Wars related. You still probably don't know that much about these characters. But I suppose the first big sort of plot thing I need to get into is the whole Great Disaster plot and how it relates to the Nihil and what the Nihil did to cause the Great Disaster. This is probably the main story reveal in the book in terms of what makes Marchion Ro interesting as a character and what allows the Nihil to be a threat against the Jedi. Which is that, like I said before, the Great Disaster is the ship called the Legacy Run basically being destroyed in hyperspace, and the parts of this ship, the sections of it, coming out of hyperspace and basically acting as like meteor strikes against planets. And they get across that there's so much energy involved because they're such big parts, as well as the speed at which they're traveling, that if they hit moons of planets, they're going to destroy the moons. If they impact planets and populated areas, they're pretty much going to destroy whole cities. Like, billions of people will die if these chunks of the Legacy Run hit populated areas. That they just go straight through space stations all over the place. So this is a huge disaster, like billions of people dying because of this. And it's like, how do you exactly deal with that? That all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you're just going about your business in this system, and boom, out of nowhere, a thing traveling at the speed of light just pops out of hyperspace. That by the time they sense it's there, a lot of the time they've seconds to deal with this, if they even have seconds. And so, how do you slow down something like that, traveling at that speed? And there's a lot of the sort of logistics of how you deal with that before they're able to predict well beforehand when the pieces are going to come out of hyperspace. But how did it happen in the first place? What destroyed the Legacy Run? In the first chapter, it's just described that the captain of the ship senses something ahead, that something comes up on the ship's sensors, that there is an obstruction ahead in hyperspace, which shouldn't be there, because hyperspace is meant to be almost like your own sort of personal bubble almost. But there's something there. And she has to make the split-second decision of like, does the ship just take the hit, or does she try to avoid it? Because I suppose the idea is that you're not particularly meant to like maneuver the ship while you're in hyperspace, because I suppose the hyperspace is doing it for you. But she tries to steer around the obstruction. And in doing so, because it's such a big ship traveling so fast, the ship basically tears itself apart because they're trying to do a big evasive maneuver. And I think they also get across, they do strike the obstruction as well. So, it succeeds. Towards the end of the book, it's later revealed that Marchion Ro did put that ship there in hyperspace. But the question is, how? How do you just like specifically target a hyperspace point where someone is traveling through and just put something there? And it's because the reason Marchion Ro has control over the Nihil, he is the eye of the Nihil, the overall leader. But interestingly, at the very start of the book, it seems like he's only like just barely the leader. The others treat him as the leader because he can offer them the technology that they need to be such capable and such threatening, pirates across the galaxy, which are these, as it's called, the paths. He offers them the paths. All of the Nihil ships are equipped with these special path drives, path engines, that specifically translate the paths into hyperspace coordinates. And the threat of the Nihil is that they can basically turn up anywhere. These are super specific and special, accurate hyperspace coordinates that basically allow them to sort of navigate around the main hyperspace lanes. So it's these kind of perfect hyperspace lanes that can just get them anywhere while avoiding the main routes. They even, I think, get across the idea that you can go like basically right in next to gravity wells and just pretty much turn up, pinpoint wherever you want in the galaxy. Towards the end, once he reveals more of a sense for what his overall plan is, he even talks about how, like, if he wanted to, he could use specific paths to hyperspace his ship basically right in next to the Supreme Chancellor's office if he wanted to. That he'd be like right there, and there's pretty much nothing that could be done to stop that from happening. And if you think about that on a whole level, the damage he could do in terms of, like, suddenly every Jedi outpost or temple is at risk because they can just turn up anywhere. But but like I said, he's not really respected as a leader. He's only respected because he's the only one who can give these paths, and they just sort of reluctantly accept him. And he doesn't seem, as well, initially at the start of the book, like the ideal leader. But as you enter, like, the second half of the book, you see basically the arc of this character becoming the leader that the group actually respects. And they do this by basically having him sort of feud with one of the three Tempests of the Nihil. So the Eye is the overall leader, and then the rest of the Nihil are split into, like, three main groups. Each one of them is run by a specific Tempest, and, you know, it means that the Nihil are three kind of relatively different groups, even though they're all Nihil. They're all under the same banner, but the three Tempests at the start of the book are pretty much viewed as being the actual leaders of the Nihil. And they just basically, yeah, you're the Eye, you know, you get some of the take because you offer us the paths, but the leaders, the Tempests, are the ones who make most of the decisions. So the plot is about Marchion Ro becoming the Eye and the guy who makes the decisions. So they have him feud with one of the like older Tempests, and the big there's some major plot points in the book that happen with regards to, like, he offers them at one point, like, oh, I have no more paths to give you. You have to calm things down for a little bit. Instead, I can tell you exclusive information. No one else has figured this out yet. I can tell you where the next emergences from the Great Disaster are going to be. Use these, you know, auction them off for money, use them for ransom, whatever way you want them. Use these until I can get you more paths. And they're like, oh, okay, fine. And so the guy that he kind of doesn't like tries to do this and basically hold a system hostage. So it's this really interesting scene where he basically talks to the senator of this system and is like, okay, I know when the emergencies are coming in. One is about to come in right now. Boom, it happens, cuts through a bunch of space stations orbiting the planet, and it's this proof that he's telling the truth. And then he says, like, okay, the second one's coming in about a minute, and I'm going to show you that we can actually stop the emergencies from happening. We can destroy them before they hit anything. So I think he gets across, like, this one's going to, like, hit the moon or something like that. So we'll destroy it. They do it. They get it right. And so it's this proof of we know when they're coming, plus we can deal with them. So this forces the senator, who doesn't want to negotiate with bandits, into this situation where she has to give all the money that they ask for. I think it's like 500 million credits or something like that. So she reluctantly transfers the money and is like, okay, deal with the third emergence you said was coming. It comes out and they shoot, but they miss. And this is interesting because they said that this emergence was going to hit the planet, basically, directly. And so they get across that about, I think it's like 1 or 2 billion people die. And they've been this, like, the Nihil up to now have been presented as this, like, wild crew, that they're having spice, you know, basically the drugs of the Star Wars world. They're drinking all over the place. They're this wild group of space pirates. And all of a sudden, they're just like, we are responsible for killing, like, billions of people there. All because we missed the shot because we were on spice, like, the whole time during this important negotiation. So this is the big point at which Marchion Ro just kind of completely loses all respect for this guy and is like, okay, he is sort of like the most influential of the Tempests. I need to deal with him to get control of this group. And it's at roughly this time in the book where they explain to you that where does Marchion Ro get the paths from? Because they also get across that his father was the previous Eye of the Nihil, and he also had the paths. And they just straight up go, on Marchion Ro's ship, the Gaze Electric, really cool name, he has this woman basically imprisoned, but she's basically hooked up to all this medical technology to keep her alive. They established that she's over 100 years old, and that's pretty crazy for a human, because they do establish that Bacta has only just been sort of like discovered a way to use it effectively. So medical technology isn't as good as it is in like the prequels and onwards. And this character's name is Mari San Tekka. Now you've heard the San Tekka before because Lor San Tekka is in The Force Awakens, and they're a family that seemingly is related to the Force and stuff like that. But in this case, they get across that I suppose in the past, the San Tekka clan was primarily known as hyperspace prospectors, that in the High Republic were in like the age just after many of the main hyperspace routes of the galaxy have been discovered, and they're still trying to discover more. So hyperspace prospecting and just business based around, mapping out hyperspace is actually very important. And the San Tekka clan are the most knowledgeable in the entire universe when it comes to hyperspace. And Marchion Ro explains that Mari San Tekka has this unique ability he's never seen in anyone else. She's sort of crazy that like they get across that she's basically some sort of hyperspace savant. That because of her advanced age, the situation she's been in for years, just giving out these paths to Marchion Ro and his father, she pretty much still believes she's like 100 years ago acting as a hyperspace prospector, and just relentlessly does this over and over again. She exists pretty much only to give these paths, which initially are the only thing keeping him in power. And they established that this is a sort of special ability she developed after some sort of an incident in hyperspace before. I don't know I can't remember the exact details, but they established that something happened to her, and after that she was capable of using the paths. And this is where they interlink, the San Tekka clan with, I guess, the Ro family. That at some point his father, I guess, took her hostage, because later on in the book, or I think it's just before this, as part of the Jedi investigation into the Great Disaster, they go to see the two main members of the San Tekka family as the hyperspace experts. And they're very coy. They're like, okay, we'll offer a lot of our scientists up to help you. But they're clearly holding something back, and the Jedi have to leave before they can get that information. But then the scene lingers on the two members, and they're just like, we do know what this is. We know that it is possible to like put an obstruction up in hyperspace, but the only one who could do that is her. But if she was still alive, she'd be like ancient, clearly referencing that it's Mari San Tekka, and they're aware that like, okay, what happened to a member of our family in the past, the Nihil now have that. So it connects to this whole Ro interlinked with the San Tekka clan, combined with some of the stuff later on with Marchion Ro. Very, very interesting. And this is probably the most like cool. They're presenting some mysteries. I can't wait to see the next book that features Marchion Ro, to find out more about the past with his father, as well as just what he's planning to do. Because the book sort of ends with everyone's behind him. All of a sudden, the Eye of the Nihil isn't just a leadership position in name, it truly is the leadership position. He has control of the Nihil. And he gets that by basically sacrificing the guy who made the big mistake ransoming off the data, sacrificing his whole crew, his whole Tempest, all of his storms. And he does this, and it's a very interesting thing at the end. He gets himself into this situation where the Republic are after him, the people left from the system that was badly damaged by the emergencies are after him. And there's this big space battle at the end where he's completely outnumbered. Marchion Ro is like, okay, I'll give you the paths. Here you go. And all of a sudden at the end, you're left with this crazy space battle where all the Nihil ships are just doing these really accurate, short distance hops through hyperspace, and just they're basically like, it looks like they're teleporting around the place. And eventually what happens is that no one's really aware of this, but the book makes it clear. Marchion Ro activates this ability with the path engines where he basically takes over them all and starts hyperspace teleporting these ships into the path of other ships. So the battle turns into this situation where the Nihil are like suicide bombing all of the Republic ships, which results in this one Tempest's like whole crew being wiped out, which he later at the very end of the book uses as he tells this story of like, you know, look how brave and like representative of the Nihil, you know, this crew was, and they sacrificed themselves for us. I gave them the paths, and look at what they were able to do. You know, that this is what we're capable of. We won't let his sacrifice be in vain, while you know the whole time that it wasn't a sacrifice, that Marchion Ro was the one who did that to basically take out one of his rivals. And he makes such a big speech, and it's an impassioned speech. And this is just after he's told the other two Tempests, like, yeah, that's exactly what I did. I just sacrificed him to gain control. And it's this proof to like the other two leaders that like, oh, he truly is in command now. They sort of respect him a bit for it. The other Nihil are just left with the idea that, okay, a third of our group is wiped out, but what Marchion Ro takes from this is that to the Republic and the Jedi, this looks like they've wiped out the entire Nihil fleet, when it's actually just a third of it. So it gives them time and space now to plan ahead for what's next, because all of a sudden the Nihil were on the Jedi's radar because of the great disaster and everything that happened. Now they're not, and he has major plans, because going forward he wants to make the Nihil galaxy-wide. He wants them to, I suppose, be attacking the outer rim, the inner rim, the mid-rim, the core. He wants them attacking everywhere. And he's going to give them all the paths, because he has years and years of paths built up. And it's going to be a big thing. When they decide to strike again, it's going to be devastating. Really, really interesting position to find themselves in. And again, it's on the outside, the Nihil are just space pirates, but they're being led by this character who has such a like deep and rich past that like connects to all this stuff about like the origins of a lot of the hyperspace lanes and the true experts in the galaxy about hyperspace. Really interesting. The final stuff with Marchion Ro is that over the course of the book, he ends up in this situation where he has Loden Greatstorm, one of the main Jedi, captured on his ship. And what he does is, there's a few reveals here that happen. One is that he reveals he knows how to keep a Jedi hostage in the right way, which is that if you just put them in a cell, there's not going to be any problem. The Jedi are used to that and can deal with that very easily. He knows that the best way to deal with the Jedi is to constantly have pain be around them, specifically the pain of others. Not torture the Jedi himself, but torture the other people around him. So anything that the Jedi does, other people suffer for it. And that pain will keep him from being able to connect strongly with the Force. And he explains that he knows that this is the way to handle Jedi, because I think they say his grandmother or grandfather did this in the past or something like that. Like knew this. That's who told him about it. Which immediately creates some sort of connection to the Ro clan, I guess. The Ro family, to Jedi, Sith, potentially. Because the other thing is that they make a specific note that Marchion Ro takes Loden Greatstorm's lightsaber and acts like this is this thing that he's wanted for so long. He's been desperate to get a lightsaber. He finally has one. This is this symbol that he now has. Is there more to it other than just he wanted a lightsaber? Or, again, it depends on what the connection is to the Force or the Jedi or the Sith or whatever. He has that lightsaber now. Very interesting. I don't know if they're going to reveal he's Force sensitive, but he seems to know how to use it. In regards to his combat ability, they establish he has like vibro shurikens, which he uses to attack one of the crew member he doesn't like. So it gets across that he's skilled. I suppose he comes across more as like a kind of ninja type character, but we'll see how good he is with a lightsaber, I suppose, potentially going forward. The thing, though, is that he also notes that a major part of his plan was capturing a Jedi. Now, my thoughts on this, because he doesn't explain exactly why he needs a Jedi or why he's keeping him hostage. My guess is that they established earlier on Mari San Tekka is on the verge of death. That even though he has a source for Bacta and can potentially keep her alive a little bit longer, she's still over 100 years old as a human, and that's a bit crazy. Star Wars, medical thing isn't so much that you can keep someone alive well beyond the lifespan of the species. That makes sense, I think. So I think he realizes he needs some sort of replacement for her, and maybe at this point he has figured out why she can do this. The connection I make is from the Thrawn books. You have the Chiss who use young, Force-sensitive kids to navigate through hyperspace, and they're called Skywalkers. I'm thinking that perhaps he's thinking he might be able to replace Mari San Tekka with Loden Greatstorm. That if he can break Loden and, I suppose, hook him up to a computer or something like that, he might be able to use the Jedi's Force sensitivity to continue making paths or something like that. That's the only way I can think about why he's trying to keep him captive, keep him alive, but also trying to break him, and them establishing that Mari San Tekka won't be alive that much longer. Finally, he takes out this purple object. They established it's some sort of like a purple stick artifact, and it's sort of glowing to a degree. And he shows it to Loden Greatstorm, and Loden has a bit of a what is this type thing reaction. I think it's meant to be some sort of an arcane Sith object, or something that's Force related in some way. Exactly what it is, I'm not sure. But again, with the fact that the Rowe family seems to be connected to all this stuff, that's the only thing I can get out of it. That, there's a lot of stuff going on here. Him claiming the lightsaber and using it, him keeping Loden Greatstorm captive, and then this object, this artifact. Really interesting stuff. But that's just what was that, 10-15 minutes of discussion just on Marchion Ro as the villain. I think he really does stand out as an interesting villain who has created a situation with the Nihil where they can be a threat to the Jedi, they can pop up anywhere, they can create another great disaster at will because of the paths, and that's how you run the Jedi ragged. Not by fighting them one-on-one or doing space battles or lightsaber battles, but just by causing disasters in enough places where they can't be there. Because I suppose moving over to the Jedi, what makes this era interesting for the Jedi is that their relationship with the Republic is working, whereas you get the impression it really wasn't in the prequel era. The Supreme Chancellor of this era, Lina So, honestly cares about the Republic and the galaxy being united and together, and the big thing in this case is expanding to the Outer Rim, bringing Outer Rim worlds into the Republic. And they're making sure to support them. It's not just a case of, oh, you're in now, we don't care about you. But truly, they're trying to give all the support that the core worlds have to the Outer Rim. So they're setting up Jedi outposts with space stations out in the Outer Rim and the Mid Rim. And specifically, they're just recently launching one of her great works as Chancellor, which is the Starlight Beacon, a major Jedi outpost on the Outer Rim that opens right at the end of this book, but is at the exact wrong time for that, given that the Nihil basically have a way to take out Starlight Beacon, I guess, whenever they want. But that's a big point right at the end, is that Avar Kriss, because of her great results over the course of this book, dealing with the Jedi response to the disaster, she is given the position of being Marshal of the Starlight Beacon outpost. So that's the sort of setup going forward of okay, the Jedi can now effectively respond to anything in the Outer Rim. They are not locked to they have to always get from Coruscant to the Outer Rim. They now can respond from the Outer Rim. So this is, I suppose, what was ended up being sort of the problem in the prequels, was that the Republic got to a point where it was more concerned with managing its core planets in the core, in the inner ring, and sort of just had to let the Outer Rim planets go and only really use them as military outposts once the war started. That there was more of a focus on the Trade Federation and the Banking Clan, which aren't even planets, but they're businesses allowed to have representation in the Senate, whereas that isn't the case here. Which is kind of really interesting, that, you know, you can see how just the Jedi are ultimately told where to go by the Republic. It works in this era because the Chancellor sort of aligns with the Jedi, whereas it doesn't quite align in the same way in the prequels, where often politics comes first before just caring about people. Whereas it feels like here, like Lina Soh's politics are to care about the people. Her big slogan is, "We are all the Republic." And most of the planets who join all believe it. Everyone is united in this. And the response to the Great Disaster shows that. It's not just that the Jedi and the Republic are able to work to effortlessly respond to this and be successful, but also that any planet who is a part of the Republic, it really feels like they're all working together. They're able to organize like all of the best minds in the Republic to create a system to predict where new emergencies will come from, and just, you know, react in that way. And it's like, this is how it should work. And I suppose the question is, in about 200 years, what goes wrong? Is it just that a new Chancellor comes in and it all goes wrong from there? Is it something within the Jedi, or is it the Sith beginning to corrupt the Senate? Which you have to remember is a key part of what is going on in all of this. That Palpatine does manipulate things to make the Jedi look bad to the people, when he is the one sending them out most of the time on these missions. As well as, like, just before that, you do have more corrupt people who, you know, are more politicking than caring about people. Which is why you have, like, the situation in Episode 1 that people always make fun of for, like, it being too political, but that's the point they're making, that Naboo, this relatively small world, it's a focus, and the Republic is more focused on, like, almost like business-wise, how does this affect the Trade Federation, rather than how does it affect the people of Naboo. And the Jedi are sort of lost in the middle of this to a degree, because they have to react on behalf of the Republic rather than being able to act on their own. And that's, I think, what the core difference is. And I'm excited to see how this begins to go wrong. Because on the politics side of things, about the only thing they set up is that one of the senators, I think it might be I can't remember the full details. One of them is kind of like, he's not particularly liking this. He doesn't like the current Chancellor, and is like, someone says to him, well, if you don't like it so much, why don't you run for Chancellor? And he's like, maybe I will. So there's at least some setup that there's going to be opposition to her. The only thing you can maybe criticize Lina Soh for in this book, and they get across it's the big struggle of all of this, is that with there being such a heavy disaster in the hyperspace lanes, for the safety of the Republic and just people in general, they have to stop access to the main hyperspace lanes for safety reasons. And so this ends up affecting the Outer Rim planets because supplies can't get out there. So she's making sure to respond to this with the right, bring the Jedi in to help, the security and so on, and just help people be as safe as possible. But she also has to shut down supplies for a certain amount of time. But it feels like she tries to make up for that at the end. As soon as possible, she reopens the lanes and so on. But the thing is, going forward with the Nihil going to strike again and more galaxy-wide, this was one great disaster. What potentially would happen if there's multiple happening? Like, what happens if there's a great disaster in the core, inner rim, mid rim, and outer rim all at the same time? Are there enough Jedi? Is there enough people? Is there enough resources to deal with that without just sacrificing billions of people? And that's probably going to be something along the lines of what they go for going forward. But again, we don't know what Marchion Ro's ultimate kind of goals are overall. Last thing to cover, I suppose, just characters a little bit. So Avar Kriss, like I said, is probably the main character. Female human Jedi Master. She's put in charge of dealing with the Great Disaster. The main thing with her they get across is that her core ability that they focus on here is her ability to lead, but also to act as like a commander to the Jedi out in the field, because she can sort of like connect them all together through the Force by like attuning like a specific, in her mind it's a musical tone, that once she finds the right note, she can link everyone together and communicate, and in the the same she can act as like a communication outpost type thing. It's sort of a battle meditation-like ability, but more for communication. But she does lead the Jedi in one of the most impressive Force feats in this book, which is that right at the start of their response, this system is getting hit by a few emergencies. One of them being a section of the Legacy Run that has a bunch of explosives on it, and this one is heading for the sun in this system. And the scientists calculate that if this thing hits the sun, it'll cause a chain reaction that will basically destroy the entire system, planet, moons, everything. It'll be an absolute catastrophe. So the Jedi have to stop this. They have to somehow find a way to redirect this container of explosives from hitting the sun, and is traveling at light speed. How do they do that? And so they use the Force. And because she's connecting everyone together, she can tell them at like exactly at this point, hit this thing with the Force to push it off course. And it doesn't work the first time, and like you have the Jedi all working together, straining themselves to the point where Jedi are dying. They're stopping what they're doing, regardless of what they're doing, to put their Force ability into this combined effort. And by the end, you even have Jedi, it feels like, from Coruscant adding their Force abilities to what's going on. And so eventually they're able to just about push it off course so that it doesn't destroy the system. Something that I don't think the Jedi of the prequel era would be able to do, because the Force is out of balance because of the Sith. I don't get the impression that it's just a case that the characters of the prequel era just would not be able to do that if they worked together. But I think it is a factor of the Force is in the right position at this point where they can do that. This is what the Jedi can do when there's when the balance is, I suppose, more on the light side of things. And it just shows you like how things change, how important a lot of the Sith machinations in the background are to stopping the Jedi from being this powerful. Similarly, a few of the Jedi in this book are capable of doing stuff like blocking blaster bolts with their hands. Now, admittedly, I think the character who does that is established to have in the past been a sort of Yoda-esque, potentially one of the best in the Order characters. He's a little bit old at this point, but he's still capable of it. And similarly, Loden Greatstorm is, as his name would suggest, he is a great Jedi, and he's viewed as being one of the best and is exceptionally powerful. You still have the Jedi capable of performing these incredible feats, and you see that with Avar Kriss's more connection Force-based ability, Loden Greatstorm's just skill in battle. Porter Engel, I think, is the character who's the one who deflects blaster bolts, and he also has a great connection with animals through the Force, which is cool. The other thing with Avar Kriss is that she brings Elzar Mann in as the sort of Jedi to be her sort of second in command on this mission. They established that they basically sort of grew up together. They were Padawans, they were younglings together, Padawans at roughly the same time, and have always teamed up for quite a bit. The other thing that they tease is that there's clearly some sort of romantic connection between these two, whether it be that it's just been there simmering in the background and is kind of maybe on the verge of happening now, or maybe something did happen in the past. There's definitely some tension there between these two with regards to this. And it feels like it's more that Avar is the one who maybe wants that more so than Elzar Mann, in terms of, I suppose, being willing to go for it right now. But Elzar is interesting as well because they established that he is a bit of a rogue Jedi. He feels like I'd say what he feels like is a mix between sort of like Anakin and Qui-Gon in terms of like he has a little bit of a different view on the Force, but he's also viewed as being this kind of Jedi who is very capable and will do things in his own way. And it feels like, yeah, he's got those aspects of Anakin, but there's also like he's wise in the Force because he takes a different approach. Like Avar describes it that like he tries to investigate all of the different and unique ways you can use the Force to the point where she feels he's never used the Force in the same way twice. One cool example of that is that when they're creating the system of droids to ultimately create a supercomputer to predict where the Great Disaster pieces are going to come out, it's overheating. And so Elzar comes up with the idea, oh, there's clouds. Let's use the Force to influence the clouds to make it rain. And Avar's like, what? Is that even possible? But he just guides her through it, and the two of them do make it rain. And ultimately, the droids are able to predict when the next emergencies are coming. So that's pretty cool. At the very end of the book, he is promoted from Knight to Master, which is something that you can tell has always been kind of hovering in the back of his mind. Why haven't they made me Master? And it's because, he is a bit of a different Jedi. And you can see a little bit of that, arrogance of the Jedi maybe in the Council's response to him. But by the end of the book, he has this vision of the Jedi running in fear from something, the Jedi running afraid. And it's described as if what they're running from and what they're afraid of is fear itself, which sort of fits for the Jedi, that fear is the path to the dark side. But they don't get across what exactly it is, but just that Jedi are dying, falling, failing, and it's all of them. What is this? What is this threat that is coming? And it's either an early setup for the Sith or this other villain that I think the YA book that's coming out next month is going to introduce. I'm not exactly sure what that is because I haven't read it yet, but I do think there's some sort of other threat that the High Republic is introducing. And I think in the first issue of the comic, I think Jedi Master Skier has the same vision, but I don't know if that's confirmed yet. But either way, that's cool. They sort of set up that like, oh, is that maybe a sign of him having Force visions like this? That is he going to be like an Anakin type character and this might lead him to fall to the dark side or something like that? Not sure. I suppose the final Jedi character I'll talk about is Bel Zettifar, who is Loden Greatstorm's Padawan. He's basically on the verge of becoming a knight, but there's a few key areas where he still has to develop his skills in. The main one that they get across is that he struggles with using the Force to land from high jumps or whatever. He eventually does this in the middle of a moment where he saves a girl. And Loden has great faith in him, but Loden is the type of Jedi to very much like, oh, you need to learn how to swim, toss you into the water, that type of thing. So you need to learn how to land from jumping off a cliff. He throws him off a cliff, and if not for another Jedi saving him with the Force, he probably would have died earlier on. So, you have with Bel him sort of doubting himself because his master is so great, yet he feels he's weak because he struggles with this, what feels like a simplistic thing of just, landing a Force jump. But otherwise, he seems, the other Jedi who encounter Bel in this book, like Porter, who's established to be really strong, views like Bel is going to be an amazing Jedi when he gets older and becomes a knight. And by the end of the book, it's like you are going to be knighted, and they set up the idea of like, I hope you're there at the ceremony, Master. But Loden gets captured, of course, on the mission by Marchion Ro. So they all think Loden is dead because he was just kind of off on his own saving someone and then didn't come back, so they have no idea what happened to him. And so Bel is like in this weird position where he's basically about to be promoted to the rank of knight, but almost doesn't want it to happen until his actual master is there. They set up, I think, right at the end, that one of the other masters is going to step in and be his master until he, does that final stage of his training. But he's left in a kind of weird position of like this mission where he was able to prove himself, but he lost his master in the process. and it's not the same as Imri from A Test of Courage in terms of their reaction to this, which I find interesting, but still pretty cool overall. So yeah, I think they're a lot of the main talking points. There's probably a bunch of little plot points I left out there, but very discussion worthy, this book, definitely. I've only read it once, and I do really want to actually go straight back into reading it again, to just go through some of these details, see what maybe characters I didn't focus on as much during my first read through. And I think that's a strength of this book. I haven't felt like with a lot of the other Star Wars books that have come out in the last few years that like I ever need to read them for a second time. But with this one, I'm like, yeah, I'd happily read this a couple of times because there's enough detail there. It's the start of an era, so it's very interesting. All the characters are pretty much new, and there's some unique ideas going on here. So yeah, the only thing lacking is probably just that on the Jedi side of things, the characters could use a little bit more depth, just to see, who actually is the main characters and who aren't, that sort of thing. But hopefully they'll fix that as we get into the next couple of books. So yeah, there's the long, detailed discussion video review for Light of the Jedi. In the comments, if you've read the book, let me know what your thoughts on it are. If you have any questions, leave them below as well. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.